Sydney Brooks was 3 reps into coaching a client when she looked up into the mirror and saw her boyfriend kissing her best friend on the other side of the gym floor. Nice. 2 more. Breathe. She pretended she had seen nothing and finished her client's set. Then she set the clipboard down on the bench, squared her shoulders, and walked the whole length of the mirrored wall in her magenta leggings, while 40 people pretended very hard not to watch, and she tapped Jae-hoon on the shoulder in the middle of the kiss. "Sorry to interrupt cardio," she said. What Sydney did not know was that the man who owned the entire building had just stepped onto the floor behind her, and he was about to lose his mind. "Before we go on, tell us where you're watching from, your city, your country. We love seeing how far these stories travel, and if you've ever had to keep your face calm while your whole world tipped sideways, stay with me all the way to the end. Now, back to the gym." For the record, Sydney had known something was off for about 2 weeks. Not enough to accuse anybody of anything, just the small stuff. Jae-hoon working late programming clients on the nights he used to spend at her place in Mangwon-dong. Sienna suddenly too busy for their Sunday coffee, then posting stories from a cafe 400 meters from Jae-hoon's apartment. Sydney had told herself she was being paranoid, because the alternative was that the 2 people she trusted most in a city 8,000 kilometers from home were lying to her face, and that was a thought she had not been ready to hold. She was ready now. Jae-hoon jumped like she had jabbed him with a cattle prod. Sienna made a small strangled noise and stepped back so fast she knocked a foam roller off the rack. The 2 of them stood there in the bright gym light, flushed and caught, Sienna's lip gloss smeared and Jae-hoon's hand still frozen at the small of her waist. And for a second, nobody in the whole enormous room made a sound. Even the treadmills seemed to hold their breath. Sydney. Jae-hoon recovered first, the way charming men do. "This isn't what it looks like." Sydney tilted her head. She was aware, distantly, that her hands were not shaking, and she was proud of that, and she filed it away to fall apart about later. "Really? Because from where I was standing it looked a lot like my boyfriend eating my best friend's face next to the kettlebells. But you're the expert. Enlighten me. What am I actually looking at?" "We were." Jae-hoon glanced at Sienna for help. "We were talking," Sienna offered, and even she seemed to hear how bad it was. "With your mouths," Sydney said. "Very intimate conversation. I could tell it was deep." She looked at Sienna, at the friend who had helped her move into her flat, who had eaten her mum's care package Tim Tams, who had cried on Sydney's shoulder about her own ex 6 months ago. "You borrowed my curling wand last week, Sienna. You slept over. You called me your sister on my birthday. And you've been kissing him how long? Give me a number. I'm Australian. I can take bad news. We've got spiders that can kill you. Please don't make a scene," Jae-hoon said. That, of all of it, was the thing that lit the fuse. A scene. Sydney laughed. Once. No humor in it. "Jae-hoon, you cheated on me with my best mate on the floor of the gym where we both work, in front of 40 of our clients. And your genuine, honest concern right now is my volume? Think about our reputations," he hissed, low, glancing around at the members who were absolutely, unashamedly watching now. "This is our workplace. Oh, I am thinking about it." Sydney's voice had gone very light and very calm, which anyone who actually knew her would have recognized as the most dangerous thing she did. "I'm thinking about how everyone in your 10 a.m. boot camp is going to find out that the great Kim Jae-hoon, Ascend's golden boy, couldn't spot his own spotter. I'm thinking about how you're always telling clients that discipline is everything, and here you are with the impulse control of a Labrador at a barbecue." A couple of the younger members near the squat racks lost it, tried to smother it, failed. Sienna's eyes filled up on cue, the way they always did, the tears she could summon like a party trick. "Sydney, you don't understand. We didn't plan this. It just, don't." Sydney didn't raise her voice. "Don't do the crying. I've watched you cry your way out of parking tickets. It doesn't work on me anymore, because I finally understand. It was never real." She looked between the 2 of them, and for one honest second, the mask slipped, and they both saw exactly how much it hurt, before she put it back. "You know the worst part? I'd have been okay. Eventually, people fall out of love. It happens. I'm a grown woman. But you did it like cowards. In secret. For weeks. And you let me keep loving both of you the whole time. That's the part I won't forgive. Not the kiss. The lying. Jae-hoon reached for her arm. Sid, can we please just talk about this somewhere? He didn't finish, because a door at the far end of the floor slammed open hard enough to bang against the wall, and a voice cut across the mirrors like a dropped barbell. What the hell is going on here? Everyone turned. A man stood at the mouth of the corridor in a plain black training tank and shorts, a matte black water bottle in one hand, sweat still at his hairline from wherever he'd come from. He was tall, built like he'd earned every inch of it, and his face was doing something Sydney would only later understand. A fury that seemed personal, out of all proportion to a lover's quarrel in a gym. How dare you do this in my gym? He crossed the floor, and the whole room seemed to lean away from him as he came. Now everybody, get the hell out. Now. Sydney had seen his face before. In the elevator, on the wall of the founder's office, on the side of every Ascend water bottle in the building. Choi Sung-ho, 39 years old, founder and chief executive of Ascend, the man who had turned a single basement gym into the biggest luxury fitness empire in the country, and who, in 3 years of her working there, she had exchanged exactly 0 words with. He was not exchanging 0 words now. A manager came scurrying out of the office corridor, tablet clutched to his chest. Sir, is everything? Clear the floor, Sung-ho said. Members get a full refund for the session, and a month's credit for the disruption. Everyone out. Now. He turned, and his eyes found Jae-hoon and Sienna, and something in his voice dropped a full degree colder. Except you two. You stay. Jae-hoon straightened, and here the golden boy made his mistake, because he'd spent 3 years being the most important trainer in the building, and he'd forgotten there was someone the building belonged to. Mr. Choi, with respect, this is a private matter between. It stopped being private when you did it on my floor in front of my members, Sung-ho said. You're a trainer at this company. You represent this brand, and you just used it as the backdrop for the most disgraceful thing I've seen in this building in 10 years. He looked at Sienna, who had stopped crying because even the tears knew this was above their pay grade. And you're a member here. You won't be, after today. You can't just throw me out, Sienna said, with the reflexive outrage of someone who had never once been thrown out of anything. Sung-ho looked at her the way you look at a wet towel left on a bench. Watch me. Sydney, standing between the wreckage of her relationship and the furious billionaire, in her magenta leggings with her heart cracking quietly down the middle, made a sound she absolutely should not have made. She laughed. It came out before she could stop it, because after the worst 10 minutes of her life, hearing a man worth several $1 billion say, "Watch me," with all the emotion of someone declining a sample at Costco, was more than her nervous system could handle. She clapped a hand over her mouth. Sorry. Sorry. That was sorry. Please continue evicting people. I'm having a great time. Sung-ho's gaze snapped to her. For a second, his face didn't change at all. Then something at the corner of his mouth moved, so fast she might have imagined it, and he said, "You're the coach. Brooks. Sydney Brooks." She stuck her chin up. From Sydney. My mum thought she was hilarious. She realized she was making jokes at the founder of the company that signed her paychecks approximately 90 seconds after being publicly betrayed, and decided, given everything else about the day, to just keep going. You don't have to throw them out on my account. I was actually handling it. I had jokes lined up for at least another minute. I heard. Sung-ho's eyes went, briefly, to Jae-hoon and back. They were good jokes. He deserved worse. If this has already got you feeling something, that specific fury when someone you trusted shows you who they really are, do me a favor and hit that like button and drop a comment telling me, is Sydney handling this better than you would? Be honest. Now, let's keep going, because this is the part where the whole thing turns. They cleared the floor in under 10 minutes. Members filed out murmuring, half of them scandalized and half of them delighted, several of them very obviously filming, until the managers made them stop. Jae-hoon tried 3 more times to talk his way back into Sung-ho's good graces, and got nowhere. Sienna left in tears that had finally become real, which Sydney noticed and, to her own surprise, felt nothing about. By the time the big glass doors swung shut, the enormous flagship floor of Ascend Yoido was empty, except for Sydney, the billionaire, and a young man in a navy suit who had appeared out of nowhere, holding 3 iced coffees and looking like he'd sprinted up 40 floors. "I brought coffee," the young man announced, breathless. I sensed a crisis. Mr. Choi does a specific walk when there's a crisis. It's faster than his normal walk, but somehow angrier. He looked around at the deserted gym, at Sydney, at the general wreckage of the afternoon. "Did I miss the crisis?" "You missed most of it, Ye-jun," Sung-ho said. "I always miss the good part." The young man, Ye-jun, held out one of the iced coffees to Sydney with the earnest expression of a golden retriever offering a dead bird as a gift. "You look like you need this more than either of us. I'm Ye-jun, executive assistant, amateur emotional first responder. I don't know what happened, but your face is doing the thing my sister's face did when her fiancé got arrested at their engagement dinner." "That's oddly specific," Sydney said, taking the coffee. "It was a specific engagement dinner." Ye-jun nodded gravely. Despite everything, Sydney felt something in her chest loosen by half a notch. She took a long pull of the coffee. It was exactly how she liked it. Oat milk, extra shot, barely any sweetener. And she wondered how a stranger's assistant had guessed that. And then she was too tired to wonder. Sung-ho, meanwhile, had gone quiet. He was watching her the way you watch someone you're trying to place. Then he crossed to the bench where she'd dropped her clipboard, and he picked it up, and he saw what was clipped to it. A battered spiral notebook, the cover soft with handling, every page dense with handwritten workout programs in 3 colors of pen. He flipped it open, 1 page, then another, his eyebrows climbing. "You write your programs by hand," he said. "Old school." Sydney felt weirdly exposed, watching a billionaire read her scribbles. "Apps are fine for tracking, but you can't feel a client through an app. I like to build the whole month by hand. See how it flows." She heard how earnest it came out and covered it with a shrug. "It's a habit. Bit sad, really." "It's not sad." Sung-ho closed the notebook and handed it back to her. And for a second, something crossed his face that she couldn't read at all. Something almost like recognition. "I used to do the exact same thing. When I was a trainer. Before all of this." He gestured vaguely at the 40 floors of glass and steel around them. "I had a notebook, same pens even. Green for warm-up, blue for the working sets, red for the notes on each person." He said it, and then looked like he hadn't meant to say it. Sydney blinked. "You were a trainer?" "For 6 years. In a basement in Silom, with no air conditioning, and a leaking ceiling, and 1 squat rack I welded back together myself." He took a slow sip from the battered black bottle, and she noticed it properly for the first time, how old and dented and out of place it was in his manicured hand, the branding worn off it years ago. "This company started as me, and 40 clients I trained by hand, in a notebook exactly like yours. Everyone forgets that. They see the buildings. They forget the basement." Sydney did not know what to say to that, so for once she said nothing. Ye-jun, sensing a moment beyond his comedic range, took a diplomatic step back and became very interested in his coffee. "Why did you do it?" Sydney asked finally. "Throw them out. It's a lot of refunds for a lover's spat that isn't your business." Something closed in Sung-ho's face. He looked out through the glass at the Han River, going gold in the late afternoon. "Because I know what it's like," he said, "to be humiliated in front of a room full of people by someone you trusted. And I know what it's like to have everyone in that room decide the problem is that you made a fuss about it, instead of the person who did the thing." He turned back to her. "They wanted you to be small so they could be comfortable. You refused. I don't have a lot of rules in my own buildings, but that's one of them." Sydney studied him. An hour ago, she'd have said the founder of Ascend was a magazine cover, a logo, a man made entirely of glass and quarterly earnings. Now there was a leaking basement in Silom, and a dented water bottle, and a specific old pain under the words. And she thought, against all reason, on the single worst day of her recent life. "Well, that's interesting. For what it's worth," she said, "whoever did that to you had rubbish taste and worse timing." Sung-ho looked at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, he laughed. A real one, surprised out of him. "That's your comfort? Premium emotional support, light insults included. I've got great reviews." Ye-jun raised his coffee. I can confirm the reviews. I wrote 2 of them. Sydney woke up the next morning famous. Not the good kind. Somebody's phone footage of the whole thing had gone up overnight, and Soul had opinions. The clip had her name in the caption by Breakfast, Sydney Brooks, the Australian coach, the foreign girl who caused a scene, and the comments were a battlefield. Half the internet thought she was a hero. The other half had decided, with the confident cruelty of strangers, that a real professional would have handled it quietly, that she'd humiliated poor Jae-hoon, that this was what happened when you let foreigners work in prestigious Korean establishments. Sydney read exactly 6 comments, put the phone face down on her chest, and stared at the ceiling of her tiny Mangwon flat. Her mum called at 9, which was midnight in Sydney, which meant Denise Brooks had stayed up specifically to yell, "Baby, are you alive? Physically. I saw the video." Your Auntie Rose sent it to the whole family group chat with the caption, "Our girl." A pause. "I'm going to kill him. I'm going to fly to Seoul, and I am going to kill that boy with my bare hands. And I look fantastic in a courtroom. I've got the cheekbones for it. Mum. What? Prison orange washes me out, but I'll make it work." Denise's voice softened. "How are you? Actually under the jokes. It's your mum. You can drop the jokes." Sydney's throat went tight. "I loved her mum. Sienna. More than him, honestly. He was a bloke I was dating. She was my person over here. I don't have that many. And she stopped. I'm okay. I will be. I've got the flat, and I've got the coaching, and I've got Colorful Strength, which is currently 11 clients, and a logo I designed myself, but it's mine, and nobody can kiss anybody to take it away from me. 12 clients, Denise said. 11. 12. I signed up your Auntie Rose this morning. She's doing your 6-week program from her lounge room in Penrith, and she's already complained about the burpees, so you know it's working." Denise let that land, then, gentler. "You built something over there, baby. On your own. Don't let 2 liars make you forget that." There was a knock at Sydney's door. She wasn't expecting anyone. She padded over, looked through the peephole, and found Oh Ye-jun standing in her hallway in another perfect navy suit, holding a coffee tray and a pastry box, and wearing the anxious expression of a man who had already rehearsed an apology. "I found your address in the employee records," Ye-jun said through the door, "which I want to acknowledge is deeply unsettling, and I'm sorry. And also, I brought oat milk, extra shot, barely any sweetener." Sydney opened the door. "How do you know how I take my coffee?" "Mr. Choi told me. He noticed yesterday." Ye-jun held out the tray. "He notices everything. It's honestly a little frightening. Last week he told an intern her posture suggested she wasn't sleeping, and it turned out she had a newborn. She cried. Anyway, he shifted his weight. He wants to see you. If you're willing," he said, and I'm quoting, "tell her it's about the video, and tell her it's not charity, because she'll assume it's charity and refuse." Ye-jun winced. "I probably wasn't supposed to say that last part out loud." "No," Sydney agreed, "but I appreciate you did." The Ascend flagship looked different from the 40th floor, where Sung-ho's office was a long room of glass, and quiet with the whole city spread out beneath it. He was standing at the window when she came in a black suit this time, no tie, and Sydney had the strange thought that he wore the suit less comfortably than he'd worn the training tank, like a man in a costume of his own success. "The video is spreading," he said, without turning around. "Jae-hoon's people and your former friend are already trying to control the story. They're saying you staged the confrontation to embarrass them, to go viral, to land, and I'm quoting one comment, a rich sponsor." Sydney's laugh was flat. "I staged my own betrayal to go viral. That's ambitious. I can't even stage my laundry." "I know." He turned. "Which is why I want to do something about it, and why I asked you here." He gestured to the chair across from his desk, and she sat, and Ye-jun materialized with coffee, and then diplomatically evaporated. Ascend is opening its new flagship in 6 weeks, the Han River location. It's the biggest thing this company has done since I left the basement. There's a grand opening showcase, an invitation-only night, 300 of the most connected people in Seoul, press, sponsors, and it doubles as a fundraiser. We fund a scholarship program, free memberships and coaching for kids who can't afford it. Kids like I was. He said it evenly, a fact and not a boast. The planner we hired resigned yesterday. Personal reasons that are none of my business, but became my problem. Sydney frowned. And you're telling me this because? Because before you were a coach, you spent 4 years in luxury event management in Melbourne. Corporate galas, sponsor activations, brand launches. It's in your file. He held up a hand before she could ask. I read your whole file after yesterday. Don't be flattered. I read everyone's file. You were good, Brooks. You were very good. You moved to Seoul, retrained as a coach, because you wanted to build your own fitness brand from the inside. And you've been quietly excellent at both jobs, while nobody in this building bothered to notice. He paused. I noticed. Sydney sat very still. You want me to plan your flagship launch? Yes. While half of Seoul is calling me an opportunist who fakes betrayals to go viral. They'll come because of the scandal, Sung-ho said. They'll stay because you're excellent. And by the end of the night, the story won't be a foreign coach who caused a scene. It'll be the woman who built the best launch this city has seen in a decade. He leaned back. That's not charity. That's the smartest business decision I'll make this quarter. I get a world-class planner who has every reason to prove herself. You get a stage, a fee that will fund a lot more than 11 clients, and the last word. 12 clients, Sydney said automatically. My mum recruited my auntie. For the second time, she surprised a real laugh out of him. What's the catch? She asked. Rich men don't hand strangers their biggest night out of admiration for their file. Sung-ho was quiet for a moment. The catch, he said, is that I recognized you, not your face. The thing you did on that floor, when everyone wanted you to shrink, and you got louder instead. I spent a long time wishing someone had told me I was allowed to do that. So, he slid a folder across the desk toward her, not pushing it the last few inches. Consider it me telling you. Sydney looked at the folder. She thought about 11 clients and a logo she'd designed herself, about a flat she could barely afford in a city she'd moved to on nothing but nerve, about 2 people who'd decided she was small enough to lie to. She thought about her mum saying, don't let them make you forget what you built. She picked up the folder. That afternoon, the first shot in the war arrived. Sienna posted a video. Soft lighting, perfect makeup, the tragic expression of a woman auditioning for sympathy. I've stayed quiet, Sienna said, dabbing at dry eyes, because I love Sydney. But the truth is, she's always been controlling, and Jae-hoon and I made one mistake, under a lot of pressure, and she turned it into a spectacle to destroy us. The video ended on Sienna whispering, I just want peace. Sydney watched it twice. The first time she was furious. The second time she noticed the background, the specific marble lobby, the particular flower arrangement. That's the Sowon Hotel Lounge, she said, out loud, to her empty flat, where the launch sponsors are staying. She sat up. She's not crying for peace. She's fishing in my sponsor pool. Sydney had been underestimated by better people than Sienna Cole. She opened her laptop, opened the sponsor folder Sung-ho had given her, and got to work. The next 4 weeks were the busiest of Sydney's life, and, she would admit later, some of the best. She threw herself into the launch the way she threw herself into everything, completely, and with commentary. She learned the flagship's bones, negotiated with vendors who called her dear, until she corrected their budgets in fluent Korean, and rebuilt the sponsor strategy from the ground up. She seated a senator who hated an opera director directly beside him on the guest list, and when a nervous coordinator questioned it, she said, they'll behave because there are cameras. Conflict with manners is still entertainment, and the coordinator wrote it down like scripture. Sung-ho watched, at first from a distance, then closer. He had a way of appearing at her shoulder at the exact moment she'd cracked a difficult problem, and saying nothing, and letting the silence be a compliment. He remembered how she took her coffee. He walked on the traffic side of the footpath without making it a thing. He listened when she talked, not the way men usually listened, waiting for their turn to be impressive, but like her thoughts were worth keeping. Worst of all, he was funny when nobody expected it, dry and quiet and perfectly timed, and every time he made her laugh he looked briefly, quietly pleased with himself, like a man who'd landed a lift he'd been training for. Ye-jun watched all of this with the barely contained glee of a boy watching his parents fall in love. You should see his calendar, Ye-jun told her one afternoon over the flagship's half-finished reception desk. He's cleared his 4 p.m. every day this week. 4 p.m. is when you do your walkthroughs. That's not a coincidence, Sydney. That's a man rearranging an empire so he can carry your clipboard. He does not carry my clipboard. He carried it yesterday. For 11 minutes, I timed it. I have a spreadsheet. You have a spreadsheet about your boss's crush. I have a spreadsheet about everything. It's how I stay employed. Ye-jun leaned in. For what it's worth, he hasn't been like this in 3 years. Not since. He stopped, and something careful came into his face, and he shut his mouth like a drawer. Not for a long time. That's all I'll say. I've said too much. If he asks, I was talking about the reception desk. The sabotage kept coming, and it got smarter. Sienna's victim content spread. A lifestyle sponsor called with concerns. A wellness brand asked, delicately, whether it might be safer for the launch to distance itself from Sydney given the discourse. Sydney took that call on speaker in Sung-ho's office, and she muted it and looked at him and said, "People love to say they hate drama while personally directing a full production of it." And Sung-ho unmuted the call and said, in the flat, pleasant voice he used right before he ended someone's afternoon, "This is Choi Sung-ho. Sydney Brooks is the director of this launch, and she has my complete confidence. If your brand is uncomfortable being associated with a woman after she was publicly betrayed, I can replace your sponsorship within the hour, and I can make sure everyone knows why you left." There was a silence on the line you could have parked a car in. Then the sponsor cleared his throat and said that would not be necessary. Ye-jun, in the corner, whispered, "Powerful, terrifying, slightly attractive," and Sydney had to fake a coughing fit. "Thank you," she said, when the call ended. "You didn't need me," Sung-ho said. "You had it handled. I just enjoy the sound of that particular man being wrong." He looked at her for a beat too long, and the air in the office changed, and Sydney became suddenly, acutely aware of how close his desk was and how quiet the room had gone, and she opened her mouth to say something clever to break it. The office door banged open, and Ye-jun fell through it, holding a tray. I sensed emotional tension and brought dumplings. For the tension, which I'm now realizing I've interrupted. I'll go. He did not go. He stood frozen in the doorway with the tray. Should I go? I feel like I should go, but my legs have committed to the bit. Sydney was laughing too hard to answer. It rained the night she learned the truth about him. The showcase was 2 weeks out. A storm had rolled in off the Yellow Sea and trapped the launch team inside the half-built flagship past midnight, and Sydney, prowling the empty floors to clear her head, found Sung-ho alone in a room she hadn't known existed. A small, quiet space on the 23rd floor, with a wall of glass and a single old squat rack standing in the center of it like an exhibit. "This is dramatic," she said from the doorway. "Even for you." He didn't turn. "It's the rack from the basement. Silum, the one I welded back together." He rested a hand on the cold steel. "I keep it in every building I open. Everyone thinks it's a design choice. My board thinks it's branding." He almost smiled. "It's not branding. It's the only honest thing in the building." Sydney crossed the room slowly. The rain sheeted down the glass, turning the city into a smear of gold. "You said someone humiliated you once," she said, "in front of a room full of people. You never told me the rest." For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't. Then he said, 3 years ago I was engaged. Her name was Ha-Oh-un. Our families approved. The business press loved it. They called us a merger. That should have been my first warning." He said it without self-pity, which somehow made it worse. "The night before the wedding, at the rehearsal, in front of both families and half my board, I found her with my closest friend, the man who was going to stand next to me the next day and hand me the rings." His jaw tightened. I said nothing. I walked out. And do you know what my own father told me? An hour later? He told me to go through with the wedding anyway. That a scandal would pass, but a cancelled wedding would damage the family and the company. That I should be a man about it. Sydney's chest ached. They blamed you. They blamed the inconvenience. I happened to be holding it. He looked at her, and the pain in his face was old and worn smooth from handling. I cancelled the wedding. And for 2 years, the story in every room I walked into wasn't that she betrayed me. It was that I embarrassed everyone by making it a thing. So I stopped making things a thing. I got very good at feeling nothing. I built this. He gestured at the tower around them. Armor's expensive to maintain, but it works. Until you walked onto your own gym floor, Sydney said quietly, and watched some poor foreign coach refuse to be small. Until then, he held her gaze. At first I saw myself in you. Then I stopped seeing myself and just saw you, and that was... He stopped, and for once the fluent, controlled man had no line ready. That was more frightening than the board meetings. The space between them had gotten very small. Sydney's heart was doing something complicated and unhelpful. She reached out, almost, then caught herself, then saw that he'd seen her catch herself, and she was 2 seconds from doing something she could not take back. I brought umbrellas, Yejun's voice echoed from the corridor, and emotionally supportive rice cakes. The storms meant to break it too. Also, I want to say, from the elevator I sensed a mood, and I respected it, and then I ruined it. And I'm aware of the irony. Sung-ho closed his eyes. Yejun, should I leave the rice cakes or... Sydney started laughing, and the almost moment dissolved into the warm ridiculousness of it, and somehow the haunted little room with the old squat rack felt less haunted after that. Sienna and Jae-hoon made their real move on the night of the showcase, and they made it in front of everyone, which was the last mistake either of them made in Sydney's story. The flagship opened like something out of a dream. Sydney had turned 3 floors of raw glass and concrete into a single glowing space, a wall of orchids behind the stage, the scholarship kids' portraits projected in light across the ceiling, the city and the river laid out behind the glass, like the whole of Seoul had shown up to watch. 300 of the most connected people in the country moved through it, drinking champagne and pretending they'd always believed in her. Even the sponsor who'd wanted to distance himself came and told a journalist within Sydney's earshot that he'd backed this vision from the start, and Sydney let him, because winning is quieter than revenge and lasts longer. Denise had flown in. She stood by the stage in a deep purple gown, watching her daughter run the biggest room in Seoul, and when Sung-ho came to greet her, she looked him up and down for a full, unhurried 5 seconds and said, "You clean up all right. I'm still watching you." And Sung-ho, billionaire, founder of an empire, said, "Understood, Ms. Brooks," with the solemn respect of a man receiving a lawful order. Sydney was at the sponsor wall when the room shifted. She felt it before she saw it, that particular ripple a crowd makes when scandal walks in. She turned, and there they were. Jae-hoon in a suit that cost more than he could afford now that Ascend had let him go. Sienna beside him in tragic white, and behind them 2 reporters Sydney recognized from the worst of the comment sections. They'd bought their way in through a donor, and they'd come to force a public reconciliation, to corner Sydney into making peace in front of the cameras, so the story could become one of forgiveness, of 2 families healing, of a foreign girl who'd finally learned to be gracious. Jae-hoon walked toward her with his arms slightly open, loud enough for the nearest cameras. "Sydney, I came to apologize. Publicly. I think we've all suffered enough." Sienna dabbed at her eyes. Somewhere behind Sydney, she felt Sung-ho go still, and then his voice, low, at her shoulder. "Say the word, and they're gone." "But it's your stage." Sydney looked at the 2 of them. She looked at the reporters with their phones already up, waiting for her to either explode, which would prove she was unstable, or crumble, which would prove she was weak. She looked at 300 faces waiting to see which foreigner she'd turn out to be. She smiled, and picked up the nearest microphone, and the room went quiet. "You know what?" she said, warm as anything. "You're right, Jae-hoon. This is a night for truth. So let's have some." She nodded to the back of the room, where Yejun was standing beside a laptop, practically vibrating. "Yejun, love." The slides, the enormous screen behind the stage, which had been cycling through the faces of scholarship kids, changed. Messages appeared. Screenshots, blown up 10 feet tall. Sienna's DMs to 3 of the launch sponsors, asking them to pull out, offering them the real story for the right coverage. An email chain where Jae-hoon coordinated the timing of the victim video for maximum reach. A message from Sienna to a reporter that read, In letters 2 feet high, she'll snap if we corner her in public. That's the shot we want. The room made a sound like a held breath letting go. See, here's the thing about cornering someone in public so you can film them snapping, Sydney said pleasantly. Into a silence you could hear the river through. You have to be smarter than the person you're cornering. And Sienna, sweetheart, you have never once in your life been the smartest person in the room. You just have the best lighting. Sienna had gone the color of the orchids. Jae-hoon's public apology died somewhere in his throat. Sung-ho stepped up beside her and took the mic, and his voice was the flat, pleasant, ruinous one. This event supports children who deserve a chance this city won't give them for free, he said. It will not be used as a stage for 2 people who tried to sabotage the woman who built it. He didn't even raise his hand. Security. The lady in white and the gentleman in the borrowed suit are leaving. They're guests too. This time, nobody defended them. This time, the room, full of the exact kind of powerful people who'd spent 4 weeks deciding Sydney was an opportunist, watched Kim Jae-hoon and Sienna Cole walk out under the light of the children they'd tried to steal the night from, and not one hand lifted to help them. Denise leaned toward her daughter as they passed. Now that, she said, was arranged. Sydney laughed, and for the first time since she'd looked up into that mirror, it didn't hurt at all. She didn't feel like the woman it had happened to. She felt like the author of the ending. By morning, the story had flipped completely. The headlines didn't say foreign coach causes scene anymore. They said the woman they tried to shame just built the best night in Seoul. The scholarship fund doubled its goal before noon. 3 brands and a magazine wanted Sydney by lunch, and Colorful Strength went from 12 clients to a waiting list she had to actually manage. Her mum sent her every article with the same message each time. I knew before the headline. Jae-hoon called 2 days later. Sydney almost didn't answer, and then, because she'd learned that closing a door properly is different from slamming it, she did. Maya. Sydney. He caught himself, and even that told her everything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Really. I lost the job, the reputation, all of it. I know that's my own fault, and I know I don't deserve to say this, but you deserved better than what I did. She listened. The apology wasn't dramatic or manipulative, for once. Just tired. Underneath it, she could hear the man she'd once loved, and she found she felt for him the clean, distant sympathy you feel for a stranger having a bad day. Not enough to go back, enough to let go. Thank you for saying it, she said. I mean that. Is there someone? You and Choi. People are saying, goodbye, Jae-hoon, Sydney said, gently, and hung up, and stood in her kitchen for a moment, feeling the specific quiet of a chapter finally closing. And then she went back to work, because work was the one country nobody could deport her from. Sung-ho planned the last part like a corporate acquisition, which meant Ye-jun knew about it within 6 minutes. Your calendar says private dinner, rooftop, no interruptions, emotional honesty, Ye-jun reported, standing in the office doorway. You booked the whole terrace. You had them remove 3 tables so it would feel intimate. There are candles, sir. You ordered candles. Sung-ho didn't look up. You read my private calendar. Only the suspicious parts. All of it is private. Then all of it was suspicious. Ye-jun beamed. I've already picked out what I'm wearing to the wedding. It's teal. I look incredible in teal. Do you need help tonight? No? Excellent. I'll help from a distance. Emotionally. Possibly from behind a plant. The rooftop of Ascend Yoshido put the whole glittering sprawl of Seoul beneath them, the river a dark ribbon threaded with light. Sydney arrived in the one nice dress she owned to find a single table by the glass rail, candles, and Choi Sung-ho standing when she approached, in a way that made him look, for once, less like a billionaire and more like a nervous man on a first date. You look beautiful, he said. Careful. Sydney sat. That was almost a feeling. I've been practicing. With Ye-jun. Unfortunately. They ate, and they talked about everything except the thing standing in the middle of the table between them. She told him about growing up in Sydney, about her mum, about moving to Seoul with 2 suitcases and no plan, and rebuilding herself into someone who could run a room in a language she'd taught herself. He told her about the basement in Silim, about the ceiling that leaked onto the one squat rack, about how success had become armor, and how heavy armor got when you never took it off. When the dinner was done, neither of them moved. Finally, Sung-ho stood and led her to the rail, and the wind lifted a curl from her shoulder, and he looked more uncertain than she'd ever seen a man worth several $1 billion look, and it made him more human than all his glass towers ever had. Sydney, his voice wasn't quite steady. When I walked onto that gym floor, I told myself I was angry because of my own past. And then I realized that wasn't it. I was angry because every person in that room wanted you to make yourself smaller so they could stay comfortable. And you refused. He swallowed. I admired you before I even knew you. Then I knew you, and admiration became something I don't have good armor against. He looked at her, plainly. No performance left. I love you. That's the whole sentence. I've been trying to make it more impressive for a week, and it won't get more impressive than that. Sydney stared at him. And then, because she was who she was, she laughed. One soft, delighted, disbelieving sound, and his face fell. That was not the reaction Sorry. She wiped at one eye, still smiling, her heart going like a drum. It's just, mate. You took so long. I've been standing next to you at 4 p.m. every day for a month, carrying feelings around like an extra kettlebell. Relief broke across his face like sunrise. Is that a yes? Choi Sung-ho. Sydney stepped in close enough that the city blurred behind him. That is absolutely a yes. He leaned toward her, and from somewhere behind a large decorative fig tree there came a crash, a muffled yelp, and the sound of a grown man in a teal-adjacent suit trying to catch a falling plant pot. I'm fine, Yi-jun announced from the foliage. I was supporting the landscaping. Don't mind me. Congratulations, by the way. The rice cakes are excellent. I'll leave them here. Sung-ho closed his eyes with the patience of a man deciding not to fire someone he loved. Sydney was laughing too hard to kiss him, so she leaned her forehead against his chest instead, and he wrapped his arms around her, dented water bottle and all, and over her head he said, "Where were we?" "I believe," she said into his shirt, still grinning, "we were at yes." And then, under the lights of Seoul, with her mum somewhere in the building loudly telling a stranger that was her daughter, and an assistant weeping quietly into a fig tree, and 11 years of a fitness empire glittering beneath them, and a magenta notebook of handwritten programs sitting in her bag, and a whole enormous life she had built with her own 2 hands, Sydney Brooks kissed the billionaire she'd never gone looking for, and it stayed exactly where it was supposed to. If this one made you smile, or cheer, or kick your feet a little, do 3 quick things for me. Tap that like button so more people find it. Subscribe, because the next story is going to hit you right in the chest. And down in the comments, tell me one word every person deserves to hear the day their whole world tips over. I read every single one. Because the people who try to make you small are only ever telling you how big they're afraid you already are. Until next time, stay loud, stay kind, and keep your receipts.